What's up? Hope you're doing well. Hey, real quick, want to get to the point. We've been talking about fear, and I've done I don't know, two or three videos here talking a little bit about fear, talking a little bit about fear and anxiety. Talked about how fear is false evidence appearing real, and when we ruminate on fear and live in fear and dwell on fear, well, we do a lot of damage. We actually can do damage to our brain. So fear causes brain damage. It kills creativity. It results in conflict because it creates internal conflict in us. And when we have internal conflict, then we're going to have external conflict in other relationships and just in life in general. We're going to feel this friction and misalignment. And we're going to get into some of the reason why we feel that misalignment as we move forward and maybe in the next few days. But anyhow, so fear, false evidence appearing real. And so we have to get beyond what seems real and get to what's true. And so getting to the truth, there's a quick little process for that we talked about. And so again, the importance of getting past fear is because we can't live the life we were designed to live when we're living in fear. And we can throw in there with it some people, fear is so common, but I also said, we can get into talking about issues with pride. We can talk about guilt. We can talk about shame. We can talk about rejection. Rejection is something people deal with and that really sticks with them. But all of those are ultimately, they're really rooted in fear. So anyhow, so I just talk about fear, but if it's fear, guilt, shame, rejection, pride, whatever it is for you, the same principles apply because none of those things are all seem real, but they're not what's true. And so we have to get to truth to deal with these things. And we've got to get this stuff out of our lives so that our brain is operating right. And so much of the sickness and the disease and just not feeling well, all of those kind of things, so much of that is actually rooted in fear and worry and anxiety. Talked about how anxiety is when fear becomes a pattern of thinking, and there's stress, and then you go into distress. And when you stay in distress for a long period of time, ultimately that turns into anxiety. So that's really when we ruminate or meditate on fear. And so again, we've got to deal with this stuff. So if you're dealing with fear and anxiety, I hope you listened to my last video. I know it was long. I'm going to make this one quicker. So I'm going to summarize. In the last video, I talked about the way to deal with it is we have to take every thought captive. That means we have to stop every thought and go, wait a minute, what am I thinking? One of the best ways to do that is by recognizing the signals in our body physically and in our emotions. And so I talked about how it can be like a splinter. If we have a splinter, we know the splinter's there. We feel the pain. We can tell you exactly where it is, and we go and we pull it out, and then everything heals. But for some reason, we don't do that with fear. We tend to let that remain. We don't go to the source. We try to ignore it, numb it, run from it, whatever it is. And the longer, just like if you left a splinter in, it would fester over time and eventually could even affect the whole limb, and your entire body could be infected if we don't deal with it. Well, fear, we just tend to ignore it. We never go to the problem and get to the root of it and pull it out and deal with it. So we just try to, numb it, medicate it, run from it, hide from it, whatever. Or even suppress it. So we don't want to do that. We want to deal with it. So that means we've got to take every thought captive, and then all we have to do is what we call truth telling. Step one, tell the truth. Step two is to have mind change. And then step three is that we need to, then if we do those two things, we'll see form change. So I'm sorry I stuttered on that a little bit. So we have to do the truth telling, tell the truth. Then we can have mind change. And when we do that, then we will see things change in form. Okay. And that means that we can see ourselves becoming fearless and walking in faith instead. So if you're a Jesus follower, if you're a Christian, then in the Bible, Romans 12:2 says that we can be transformed, changed in form by the renewing of our mind. So how do we renew our mind? Take every thought captive, tell the truth. And that means going to God and saying, God, here's the truth of how I see this. This is how I see it. I'm afraid of this. I'm worrying about this. I'm fearful about this. And we begin to share with him best we can and try to dig down into what is that fear? Name the fear. What is it I'm fearful of? Who is it? All of those kind of things. Get into it. Tell God the truth. And don't make it pretty. Just tell him the truth. Be real with him and say, here's how I see it. Here's how I see you, God, in the situation. And a lot of times we have to tell God, here's part of my fear is I see all of this. It appears real. And the reality is I don't trust you. Now, see, we get scared of telling God that, but that would just be telling God the truth as we know it and see it. What's really going on? What do I really believe, right? So what is it I believe about God in this situation? What is it I believe about myself? What is it I believe about others, right? And so we go to God and just tell that truth to him. So that's truth telling. And then once we've done that, then we need to ask God, will you tell me the truth, okay? Now, one little trick here is that sometimes I think it's good to just picture the face of Jesus, whatever that looks like to you. Picture the face of Jesus, and then imagine yourself handing whatever your fear is, your guilt, your shame, your rejection, whatever. Hand that to God, hand that to Jesus, and then just watch and see what he does with it. And it's fun to do this because some people will say, well, I see him crumple it up and throw it over his shoulder. I see him eat it. I see him burn it up. I see him laugh. I see him cry. Right? So you hear people say different things about that. But that helps to just think about picturing the face of Jesus, handing that fear to him, and then seeing what he does with it. So we've told the truth, and now we're going to we've told the truth, and then we're going to have mind change. The way we have mind change is to let God then tell us the truth. Let him tell us the truth. And so we get out of operating in the false evidence that appears real, that seems true to us. We tell that, then we receive from God the actual truth, from the source of truth, and that is when we can have mind change, okay? And then when we have mind change, when we hear the truth from God, then we can begin to see things change in form, okay? So again, if you've never walked through this again, I'd love to walk through it with you. So some of you have already done this, but feel free to hit me up, and we can spend some time talking and working through this together. I also told you about my buddy JD at Identity XL. You can go to identityxl.com and you can send a message to him there, and he's awesome at walking through this stuff too. So we'd love to help you just get going with it, and once you learn it, you can do it, and you can actually teach other people how to do it. So that all fits into Romans 12:2. Again, if you're a Jesus follower and know the Bible, we can be transformed. Things can change in form by the renewing of our mind. So if you're stuck in anxiety, if you're stuck in fear, and you deal with this stuff all the time, you have these negative emotions and this internal conflict and all this external conflict, well, let's get down to what's really going on inside of you. What's the real fear? Tell God the truth, receive the truth for mind change, and then see things change in form. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. Usually what we think is the problem on the surface rarely is actually the problem. And there's a great example of this. If you go into Judges 6, I believe it is, that's where we see the story of Gideon, who many of you may know that story. And in that story, the Israelites are living in fear because every year they plant their crops. And every year, when it's time for harvest, the Midianites come in and they wipe the entire country out. And the Israelites come back the next year, plant everything, do all the work. And sure enough, at harvest time, the Midianites come in and wipe it all out again. And what we see is that the Israelites have become so afraid that they are actually dwelling in caves in the mountains and hiding. And they keep doing this for 7 years. They keep planting crops, and the Midianites keep coming and wiping the whole place out. And so finally, after 7 years, they finally go, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And they begin to cry out to God. And what God says to them is, look, the Midianites aren't even the problem. The problem is your fear of the gods of the Amorites. Oh, that's weird, but it's the Midianites that are coming in every year and destroying their crops. And see, they think that's the problem, and that's what they're hiding from. And when they finally go to God and go, God, oh my gosh, we're scared to death, but this is terrible. There's got to be some deliverance from this. Aren't you the God who delivers? And see, they came and finally told God the truth. And then what happened? God responds to the truth. He never responds to the lies. See, as long as they were hiding and living in fear, he wasn't going to talk or respond to that. As soon as they got honest, God responded. And what did he say? Look, the Midianites, what you think is the problem over here, isn't the problem. The problem is your fear of the gods of the Amorites. Now that's weird. And really, if you go and study, the Amorites were actually pretty scary people. The things that they could do is a lot of witchcraft, and they did appear to be powerful. And so what God then, when he came to Gideon, what he told Gideon to do was, Gideon, I know you're afraid of the Midianites, but it's the problem is the fear of the gods of the Amorites. And by the way, the altar and the idols are in your house. And so the first thing that God asked him to do was go tear down those altars that represent your fear of the gods of the Amorites. So see, he asked them to tear down the fear first, and then build an altar to me, build an altar to God, make me first. And when you make me first, then let's see what happens. And that's where we see then the really crazy, cool stuff that starts to happen in Gideon's life. So there's just an example of what we think is the problem is not actually the problem. In your own life, you're going to find that that's true too. You have this fear, but until you take the time to stop and realize what's going on, get honest with God and tell him what you think, and then let him point out to you, well, I know you think that's the problem, but here's actually the problem. So it may mean that whatever the situation was that you were fearful of doesn't go away, but all of a sudden you look at it and go, oh, well, I can walk through that, right? Because that's not even really the problem. The real problem was something in my heart or in my mind or some other problem over here. And so again, truth tell, mind change, form change. And what you think is the problem is actually rarely the problem. And so we've got to go to God and get the truth. So I hope that helps. And here's why it's important, because as long as we're living in fear, as long as we're living in the false, then and we're walking around with fear, guilt, and shame, we will never be able to be the person that God designed us to be. And if we can't be the person that God designed us to be, we're never going to live the life that he desires for us to live, which that's where we find true fulfillment, true happiness, true joy, all of the things that we actually are seeking. So we're going to get into that more. Again, this is all part of my story. I'm just sharing with you the things I've learned and how to deal with these things. So we'll talk again soon. Have a great night.